Ladies and gentlemen, things have gone from bad to completely dire, and the middle class have hit their breaking point. In today's video, I have some shocking news and data to show that the middle class are being smashed and they're being attacked from every single angle. Food prices are rising, energy prices are rising, rents are increasing, interest costs on debt is skyrocketing, real wages are falling, and people's savings accounts are being drained to zero. I'm sure you already know that there's a cost of living crisis going on right now, and I've known this, I'm sure everyone knows this, but I've got some new data and some new information to show exactly how bad things are really getting. And if things keep going down this trajectory, it's looking like we're going to be heading back to a two-class system of the have and have-nots, the serfs and the lords. So everyone, let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into the news, the facts, and the data. So listen to this, everyone. A tsunami of shutoffs. 20 million US homes are behind on energy bills and they risk having their electricity shut off altogether. This is absolutely insane, everyone. 20 million Americans are at risk of having their energy shut off. And we're getting closer and closer to winter. And I think this is going to be a very, very cold and dark winter in the US. There's already a very cold and dark winter here in Australia. I know my gas bills have been absolutely skyrocketing. And we've seen in Europe how bad the energy crisis is going over there. And this is just simply unbearable. People cannot afford these energy price increases. And say, for example, if it was just energy prices going up and nothing else was going up, maybe they could afford it, but it's not just energy, people. Rent is skyrocketing, food is skyrocketing. Let's have a look. Listen to this. The snowballing US rental crisis is sparing nowhere and no one. And this just isn't affecting the poor. Even people on good incomes now are struggling. We're seeing some, one-bedroom apartments in New York City, for example, renting for $3,500 a month. That is completely ridiculous. And we're seeing in Florida, specifically Miami, they're seeing their rent increase by absolutely astronomical amounts. If you look at this chart here, we can see here single-family rent surge. Overall rents rose by a record average of 14% in May from a year earlier. And we can see here the hardest hit areas: Miami, Florida, up 39%, Orlando, Florida, 24%, Las Vegas, Phoenix, San Diego, Atlanta, Austin, etc. And this is why the CPI is so rigged, because the CPI is saying rents are only increasing 5% a year. And this is why the CPI is so much lower than many people think. Everyone knows inflation's at least 15%. There's no way it's the 8% that they're announcing. And this is because rents make up a third of the CPI and they're severely underreporting the real rate increases. We've already got a huge homeless crisis in the US, especially in California and San Francisco, New York, etc. But this is only going to make the problem much, much worse. We're seeing families having to revert to living in cars. But unfortunately, people, it doesn't end there. Look at this. Americans' grocery bills are set to reach a new high on food inflation. Finished consumer food prices are up almost 16% from last July. And listen to this. Egg prices have jumped 44%. Plus, there's also big increases for beef and veal. This is a complete disaster. All the items that are mandatory for people's survival, shelter, heat, and food, all of these three items are absolutely skyrocketing, and it's just simply no way, if you're on a medium income, if you can afford these price increases. And this is just a matter of time before people really get upset. And society is very fragile. They say they're only 9 meals away from anarchy, and I think we're only about 3 to 6 months away before the middle class getting completely wiped out and we start to see mass defaults and bankruptcies. But what do they keep telling us? Well, look, inflation's good because then you can get a pay rise. Well, no, even though in dollar terms your pay may be going up, look at this data. In real terms, wages are falling. So according to the BLS, real average hourly earnings decreased by 3% seasonally adjusted from July 2021 to July 2022. The change in real average hourly earnings combined with a decrease of 0.6% in the average work week resulted in 3.6% decrease in real average weekly earnings over this period. So not only are costs increasing at an unbearable pace, also in real terms, people's wages are falling. Again, this is a recipe for disaster and people cannot hang on for much longer. But what do these big businesses keep telling us? Look, we can't afford to pay workers anymore. That's going to increase costs and increase inflation. Well, that doesn't seem to apply to the 1% and these big high-flying CEOs. Look at this new shocking data, what's happening with their incomes. So the wage gap between CEOs and US workers jumped to 670 to 1 last year, studies find. That is absolutely shocking, everyone. CEOs are making 670 times the average worker now. The median worker is getting $23,900 while the average CEO is making $10 million per year. A study of 300 top US companies released by the Institute of Policy Studies on Tuesday found that the average gap between CEO and median worker pay jumped to 670 to 1, meaning the average CEO received 670 in compensation for every $1 the worker received. The ratio was up 604 to 1 in 2020. That is a staggering increase. It used to be 604 to 1 in 2020 and it's increased all the way to 670 now. So I think what they're really trying to say is, look, we've given ourselves a huge pay rise, and after that, we don't have any more to give to you peasants. Now, what else does the mainstream media and the central banks keep saying? They keep saying, look, don't worry, we're not in a recession. The consumer is strong. The consumer's balance sheet is strong. Well, people, that's not true at all. Look at this data. This is the US personal savings rate. Now we can see here it hit a high in April 2020. That's when all the stimulus checks came out of 33%. But look what's been happening since then. Again, they got some more stimulus checks in March 2021. It has been absolutely collapsing. And now people's savings rate is only 5.1%. Why do you think that is? That's because they have to use their savings to keep up with the rising cost of living. But unfortunately, it gets even worse with this because most people have tapped out all their savings. Most people live paycheck to paycheck. So what is their last resort? That's right, debt, credit card debt. And we're seeing an alarming new trend. Look at this. American household debt has hit a record 16.2 trillion as mortgages, credit card spending swell, and delinquencies are creeping up. These numbers are absolutely astronomical. $16 trillion in debt. They're getting close to 100% of GDP in debt. And it's not really a good mix to have record debt right when interest rates are surging higher and higher. And they've only just started increasing and they are going to get much higher. Meanwhile, credit card balances jumped by a massive 46 billion or 13%, representing the largest yearly increase in more than 20 years and the second biggest driver of overall debt last quarter. That's another thing the mainstream media keeps saying, these central bankers, they keep saying, look, people are spending so much. Well, the reason retail sales are up is because one, prices are going up, and number two is people have no choice but they're having to take on more and more debt to keep up with the rising costs. But unfortunately, what happens with debt and what happens with credit cards, eventually your credit cards gets maxed out and people will run out of money after they've exhausted their savings. People, this is the worst cost of living crisis I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I think the inflation now is actually worse than what we saw in the 80s. Remember, they changed the way they record inflation in the 80s and in the 90s. If they use the same method they used to record inflation in the 80s today, I think we'd actually have higher inflation. And what has happened ever since they took us off the gold standard in 1971? All we've seen is a standard of living fall lower and lower and lower. All we've seen is costs increase higher and higher and higher. They keep saying inflation's a good thing. Well, we've seen over the past 40 years, wages are not keeping up. And to me, it feels like we're heading towards a tipping point. It feels like the middle class is hitting their breaking point. It feels like we're getting to a point where it's going to become so burdensome, the cost of living, we're going to see social unrest and people hit the streets. Eventually, people are going to say enough is enough. And unfortunately, the people that created this problem, the government by injecting huge amounts of stimulus, by the central banks from printing so much money and devaluing the currency, not going to be held accountable. The solution for every single problem is just take on more debt. Just throw more money at it. It's literally like trying to put out a fire by throwing petrol on it. They are not fixing the fundamental issues. What they should have done is increase supply, improve productivity, and invest for the future. But no, the answer for everything is things are too expensive. there's a shortage, we'll just give you more money to create more shortages and to make things more expensive. So honestly, people, I think this is an absolute tragedy, and I think it is heartbreaking to see so many million Americans, and this is not really just America, this is happening around the world. It is heartbreaking to see so many people struggle, and unfortunately, I just think things are only going to get worse. So I think now is your last chance. If you can, start a side hustle, find ways to increase your income, find a way to reduce your expenses, because that's the only way you're going to get through this. Now, for my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, thank you. I'll see you all in the next video.